Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 34. Still can't quite believe we got that far. Episode 34 of Artefact Live, where we look at the art and science of storytelling. Well, if this is the first time you've been here, and I know there's a few of you who haven't been here before, please pop your name and where you are in the chat. It'd be lovely to know where you're tuning in from. Last week, I think we had 8 countries tuning in for the live show, which was terrific. So I really do appreciate that. The other thing, if you are a member of the Empathy Engine Facebook group and you'd like to contribute in the chat, now you mustn't remember this, forget this, guys. There's a little thing that you have to do on Facebook, which is on the screen now. Basically, you have to click that 3 times, and it'll mean your name will come up in the chat, and you don't want to just appear as Facebook user. But all the other platforms, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, etc., they all work fairly well. So it's the only one that we have to do that with. So thanks for that, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit of a fiddle. Now, last week we spoke about magic, and it was magic, as they say in Glasgow. My guest, Matt Pritchard, was fantastic. I thought his idea of the wonder cycle was very interesting, and in fact very, very useful and pretty important in terms of putting together a story and trying to engage people in how you tell stories. So well done, Matt. I really did enjoy it. And I know the views we've had on repeat have been tremendous. So I really do appreciate everyone tuning in and commenting on that. Now, today, I've got a very special guest, Professor Robin Dunbar, who I did meet 6 years ago and interviewed him for some work I'm doing on a book. And we had a good chat back then. And he's the first of 3 people that I'm really seeing as a bit of a trilogy for the show, because as you know, although I spend most of my time on the keynote stage now, or the virtual keynote stage now, I'm also very interested in disruption, and particularly on exponential disruption of society. And Robin's expertise, which I'll explain in a minute, then obviously I'll invite him to talk more about it, really sits extremely well with that. But we've also got coming on next week, hopefully next week, Ewan McPherson, who will be talking, Ewan Morrison. Talking about Ewan McPherson's a good friend of mine from university. Ewan Morrison, who's probably the best known author in Scotland at the moment. He's writing some amazingly powerful books that take a step into the future and speculate where we might be in terms of the impact of social media, exponential growth in biotech, nanotech, AI, etc. She's coming at it from that angle. And then the third one is a lady called Nancy Duarte. Now, Nancy, I believe, is the best presentation coach on the planet. She was responsible for Al Gore's famous film that won him an Oscar, The Inconvenient Truth. And she's also a very nice person, but she's at the absolute top of the game in terms of making complex data sets understandable by the public. And that's where really my guest, Robin, comes in, because Robin's work, he spent some of his career working as a science writer, where he was looking at communicating science with the public. But he's currently head of social and evolutionary neuroscience research group at the Department of Experimental Psychology in Oxford. He's known for formulating, and I love it. I love this. The Dunbar's number. We're going to have to ask him about that, which is a measurement of the cognitive limit that individuals can have, but also the maximum they can have and still maintain a relationship that's worthwhile and worth having. He won the Huxley Medal in 2015. He's written loads of books. A couple of them are some of my favourites. One that he wrote is called The Human Evolution, which I really like. And the other one we're going to talk about in a minute. I'm just going to get this off and I'm going to introduce Robin. Let me just take off this little caption before I do that, Robin. So welcome to the show, Robin. Nice to see you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Thank you very much. Now, just talking about your latest book, I've got my copy of it. Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
Yes,
I can have dinner beans for breakfast now. Somebody's bought a copy.
Well, I've got nearly all your books. I don't think there's any I don't have. I found some of the earlier ones harder to get hold of, but certainly your more recent ones are all really easy to get hold of. I think it's Penguin, isn't it? I've published some of them. Yeah. So that's been very straightforward. So would you mind, I know I've given a very brief introduction, Robin, but would you mind just giving my viewers some background to what it is you actually do and what your research is all about these days, please?
Well, I guess I'm really interested in social evolution in general, how it is that all, let's say, more advanced animals, higher vertebrates, birds and mammals, the kinds of social systems they have, the way they behave in the context of this very complex social world they all live in. And of course, you end up, especially if you work on monkeys and apes, as I've done for at least the first half of my career, thinking about humans. So for second half of my career, second 25 years, has really been spent diving very deeply into the nature of human sociality, how our particularly complex societies have evolved, if you like, and what kind of why they've evolved. So we've been interested in everything from kind of top down, looking at what the societies actually look like, to bottom up, looking at the ecology they sit within, the genetics that underpins it, the kind of physiological processes and neurological processes that underpin our relationships. So It's been 25 years of great fun, I can tell you.
And the thing that you're in the public eye for, I think somewhat down to Malcolm Gladwell talking about you in one of his famous books, is the Dunbar number. Could you explain that to everyone, please? Would you mind?
Yeah, sure. So Dunbar number came about by accident, actually.
Oh, did it?
Yes, completely. As you correctly defined it a little earlier, it's the number of people, the limit on the number of people that we can have meaningful relationships with. So I have infamously been known to describe it, and this ended up with it getting on QI, as the number of people who, if you met them at 3 a.m. in the departure lounge in Hong Kong airport, if we can ever fly anywhere again, you wouldn't feel embarrassed about going up to them and sort of clapping them on the back and saying, "Have a beer, how are you doing? Haven't seen you for ages." And that number came about because I was looking at the relationship between brain size and social group size in monkeys and apes.
Right.
And as you do, 3 bottles of whiskey sort of into the evening at about 3 a.m., I kind of wondered, well, what does this tell us about human social groups? If we take the equation that underpins this relationship between monkey and ape group sizes and brain size, we can extrapolate it to see what the human brain size would tell us. And the number came out about 150. And I've spent a lot of time idly collating reams of data on just how big our social groups are. And indeed, the number 150 just keeps coming up all the time in this context. And even in terms of the organization of societies and indeed businesses.
Yes.
It's sort of very widespread. But the whole concept has got much more complex since those heady days, gosh, way back in 1992, 93, this was. We discovered that Dunbar's number of 150 isn't a single number. It's just one of a series of layers, which have a very distinct mathematical shape and size, which kind of defines our natural social world. So your world of friends and family really looks like the ripples on a pond, if you like. If you imagine yourself as the stone thrown into a pond, you're surrounded by these layers which have very specific numbers of people in them. So typically, some people have fewer, some have more, but very consistently, these layers are at about 5, 15, 50, 150, and then they extend on beyond that to 500, 1,500, and 5,000. 5,000 is the limit on the number of faces we can look at and say, I've seen that one before, or that's a complete stranger.
Right, okay.
There's memory thing. But the 150 is important because it's really the limit on the number of people who will do you a favor if you ask them without kind of going, well, it's not very convenient, or, you must agree to pay me back in some form later. They're people who will know you well enough and value you well enough to voluntarily come to your aid.
Is there any, and I kind of know the answer to this question because I've read your work, but for people who haven't read it,
we're on the test bit now, are we? How well you've read my work?
Well, you can test it, like,
what are the page numbers?
Yeah, but it's quite an obvious question, Robin. I mean, the word meaning is an interesting word. Meaningful, rather, is an interesting word in itself. But have you seen that number been impacted or changed by the absolute explosion of social media and other communication methodologies that have flooded the world in the last, 15 years at the very most? Has it changed? Are the patterns maintaining, or have you seen tweaks in that number or those numbers?
The short answer is it doesn't seem to have had any impact at all on the
Yeah.
numbers themselves. We've looked at Facebook data, we've looked at Twitter data, we've looked at telephone calling patterns using national calling databases from mobile phones, not from Britain, but from elsewhere in Europe.
Yeah.
And you just get the same pattern. If you, yes, of course, you can sign up 5,000 people as friends on Facebook if you want to do. But I noticed with some bemusement that inadvertently Facebook put the limit at 5,000. It's actually before we realized there was a real limit at that point. We thought the limit was more like 1,500.
Yeah.
You see exactly the same numbers, and what is amazing is you see the same frequencies of contact that you see in face-to-face, the face-to-face world. So these layers of your sort of social world, as it were, each of the layers is associated with a very specific frequency of contact that you have to see each of the people in that layer to keep them in that layer. And so the core inner layer at five kind of intimate friends, if you like, are you have to see at least once a week. If you see them less than that, they will kind of slide slowly into the next layer down, the 15 layer. And we see exactly the same frequencies of contact on Facebook and in Twitter. I don't know what people do on Twitter because this can't be their social world. Amazingly, you see the same thing. The other amusing anecdote about all this is that originally we knew about the 5, 15, 50, 150, 500, 1,500 layers. And when I was giving talks about this, I used to say to the audience, well, look at the numbers, right? You can see that very roughly each layer is 3 times the size of the layer inside it. And these layers count cumulatively. So the 15 layer includes the 5 people in the layer within it, the more intimate layer within it. But each layer is 3 times the size of the layer inside it. Now, just backtrack down through the layers from 1,500. What happens? There's a layer missing, surely. It's at 1.5. And I used to kind of joke about this, and everybody said, well, how can you have 1.5 relationships? And I said, well, it's obvious. Some people have 2, half the population has 2, and half the population has 1. What's the difference? The boys versus the girls, because the boys can either have a best mate they go out drinking with or whatever, or they have a romantic partner. They can't manage 2 together. Girls have both, and that's how you get 1.5. Well, my Italian collaborators duly turned up this layer at 1.5 on both Twitter and Facebook, and we see it in the telephone database. It's extraordinary. It really is there. Wow.
Yeah. And
so you can't tell me that doing this kind of stuff isn't fun, you know. It's
absolutely.
In the aisles, you know.
What's interesting about Twitter, and we have quite a big viewing population on Twitter, it's where a lot of academics live, you know, Robin. It really is.
Yeah.
And
I say nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there seems to be, if you know where you're going on Twitter and you know how to use the hashtags and things, you can actually have quite an interesting life on Twitter. It's not for me, I have to say. I mean, I broadcast onto it, but and then have you ever done anything with Twitch? Have you come across Twitch? Yeah. Oh, it's the Wild West, man. It's like it's basically where the world's best broadcasters like this. I mean, I'm not in any way the world's best, but it's where all the best broadcasters are, and most of them are younger people broadcasting about gaming technologies and music. It is. I think it would blow your mind because the level of interaction and the quality of what they do is absolutely extraordinary. and you never see that level of digital interaction in organizations. I mean, I've worked in hundreds of organizations and I've never ever seen it. So it's worth having a peek sometime, but it might blow your mind, because it certainly blows my mind every time I look at it. Hello to the Twitch community. I know you're there. Thanks for tuning in.
Actually, now you mentioned the gaming world. That's one of the nice examples of Dunbar's number, or at least the Dunbar's number series. Because a collaborator of mine in Austria has analysed one of the Austrian big gaming worlds called Pardus, and there in Pardus, if you look at the kind of alliance formations, as it were, within the game, you see exactly these same numbers again. It's quite extraordinary. Of course, the alliances turn over much faster than real life relationships do, because obviously, they're focused on the particular moment in the game and the particular task that they're trying to solve. But, you see the same patterns. And this kind of really speaks to the fact that there are these limits on, if you like, the number of people we can hold in a particularly close relationship with us at any one time. And the layers really correspond to different degrees of emotional closeness, and therefore understanding of how the other person is thinking. That's what really sets the layers up.
Could I move us from that angle to something that is very close to my Odyssey's heart, and that is storytelling?
Yeah.
Now, evolutionary psychology has, I mean, how long has evolutionary psychology been around? It's not that old as a discipline, is it? No.
30 years, maybe.
Yeah, 30 years, what I would have said. And it has started to get some, awareness out with the academic chambers, if you like, and with the likes of, Jordan Peterson talking about it, Sam Harris talking about it, you talking about it. What is it? What does it bring? And why? I'm asking two questions at once. It's a really bad thing for an interviewer to do, but what is it? And why do you think it's suddenly become part of the public consciousness? It's starting to be, people are actually interested in it. You'll get asked, what's that evolutionary psychologist thing about?
Right. Well, I guess the first place to start really is what evolutionary psychology is. So really this is just applying the general background theory of evolution by natural selection, Darwin's great theory, explaining the evolution of species. Although Darwin, much of Darwin's work was actually on, once he'd sort of dealt with the species, he went on to deal with basically psychology and behavior and so on, which was equally important, really. But what it's doing is simply taking the general principles of how evolution works and asking the extent to which that illuminates our understanding of psychology, on the grounds that, the human mind is a function of the human brain, and the human brain is a consequence of evolution. It's evolved to do a purpose. So people have spent a lot of time, more successfully and less successfully, trying to unpack the relationship between sort of various aspects of human behavior and human psychology in terms of what we would expect from the general theory of evolution. It comes in two varieties, really, I guess. One is looking at the behavior and behavioral differences between people in terms of, sort of how behavior and the mind behind it is designed to enable you to solve the problems of foraging, parenting, mate searching, all these kind of traditional zoological evolutionary topics. And then the other half is really the more psychological stuff, focused on the brain and the mind, asking more about the design features of the human mind and how this has been tweaked, if you like, by evolution to allow you to solve those kinds of problems. So your second question was,
why has it become part of the
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting, because it goes back to the sociology of science. So there's been a very long-standing theory, if you like, in the sociology of science, that it takes about 10 years for your colleagues to come to accept your novel, clever theory that you just proposed. It takes about 30 years for it to become widely current in the wider world. In other words, for everybody to have heard about it. It's a long, slow haul. And this is why it's very important to have clever ideas when you're young, so that you're still around when everybody's heard about it.
Right, okay, excellent. It strikes me
also,
that
I hasten to add, there's a saving grace here, because if it turns out not to be such a clever idea, at least you've still got time left
to have another one.
A, before anybody else finds out about it, and B, to have another one.
Yes, I remember my old professor, Dougal Gardner was his name, is professor of pathology in Edinburgh when I worked with him. And he once said to me that one of his best friends, who was a specialist in colour, in fact, he was the fella who demonstrated the Turin shroud was a fraud.
Right. Yeah.
And he actually had an idea when he was a young medic, and he spent 60 years basically making his living off of this idea. And in his early 80s, his idea was shown to be wrong. And he did, and he went, "Brilliant! That is fantastic news." You can't imagine that in a non-scientific world, can you? You know, that sort of approach to it. So we've got a question here for you. If you don't mind, we'll put it on the screen. We've got a question from Ben Affia. Isn't the number of people we can hold at a distance exploding now? Our wider social networks aren't necessarily people we can ask favours of, but they'll readily help in other ways, like answering questions, giving advice. You got a perspective on that, Robin?
Yep. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's perfectly true. That's a benefit of the digital world, really. But what it hasn't changed is the number of people we have meaningful relationships with, which is really what Dunbar's number is about. The difference between kind of the small favors, if you like, that complete strangers will do for you, and the question of whether they will lay down their life for you. And indeed, you know, when your world falls apart for what the many reasons it invariably does, and you need a kind of a hug and a pat on the shoulder and some comforting words, how much time they'll give you. And my usual invitation at this point is to suggest you walk out into the, well, I'm not sure if we can do that yet, but when we're let out of school, finally, walk out into the street, throw your arms around the nearest stranger there in Stockey-Hall Street, and say, you know, my life's just fallen apart. Give us a hug, mate. And I'll bet you anything you like that the first thing they'll do is reach for their telephone. They'll either call the police or the ambulance. But you do the same thing to one of your 150 and they'll give you time for sure.
Yes. To go back a step, because there's so many interesting things here that we could probably spend hours talking about. But one of you probably don't know this, but in my career, when I first came across Dunbar's number, I was working for KPMG at the time, and I was leading a sort of innovation practice within KPMG's consulting business. And we used your number to structure projects.
Wow.
We actually went into clients, and we not just the 150.
Where's my paycheck?
Well, you can. I left there a long time ago, so you can send them a demand. Don't tell them it was me. God knows I've got plenty of money, but we used to use it. So we would go in teams, and we structured the teams from 50 to 30 to 100. You know, up the scale. That's exactly how we did it, and it's quite interesting reflecting on it. And I was just thinking about it this morning, because the most successful team I think I've ever been in, there were 100 of us, and we were worked in the military. It was in Bath, working with the military in Bath for 3 years. And we had an incredible team of people, but we were all broken up into little sub teams of 15. That won't surprise you. And to this day, I swear to you, unless they've died, these people are still extraordinarily close, and we've not worked together for 20 years.
Right.
It's incredible how long-lasting relationships can be in that, if the team size is right. Because I mean, the other thing I've seen, and I'm sure this is the question there was going to be a question at the end of all that, the application of this. I know you're aware of some of it, the likes of it, Gore, etc. But have you seen much application of your ideas in the corporate world?
No,
No.
I
Weird.
only know of two examples. I mean, one
Yeah.
which you've just mentioned is the
Yeah.
structure of Vortex as a company, which
Yeah.
long predates the discovery of Dunbar's number. As
Mm.
I'm inclined to say, it's a great pity, really, because if only he'd waited a bit and then come and asked me,
Yeah.
the earnings I would have had on the royalties from that and the commission, because Cortex is one of the most successful companies, medium-sized
Oh,
companies
yeah.
in the world, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't be having this chat either in this environment or in a pub in Glasgow. I can tell you, we'd be on my private yacht in the Caribbean.
Well,
The only
it's
other one I
funny.
know, the only other one I know, which I'm sure will warm to everybody's hearts,
Hmm.
is the Swedish government's tax collecting agency,
Oh,
on behalf of their inland revenue department that actually collects the tax, restructured themselves. I'm told,
yes.
so that each tax officer dealt with just 150 people. And that
Right.
what that meant was you always had the same tax officer to go and talk to. So he or she knew who you were. They knew, what your problems were or whatever, and could both, demand the money, but also help you out. And also, the tax officer, it was just within their limits of the number of people they could know at that personal level. And I think, why on earth isn't Whitehall queuing up at my door?
Maybe you need an agent, Robin.
Maybe.
It could be that, but it is interesting. And when we come back after a quick break, I'm going to delve into this a bit more, because the specific thing that I did a piece for one of your competitors, another university, their research team recently, about the sort of the storytelling in science piece and how they
Right.
communicate with the public. And I got them to do some storytelling. I mean, the academic thing. You go to a conference and you do your poster. You present your
Right.
poster. The standard was absolutely terrible, Robin. I mean, it was these
Tell me.
clever, brainy people, but the standard was shocking, man. And we'll talk about that when we come back after the break. So thanks so far. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'll speak to you in a couple of minutes. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that so far. Robin is fascinating, and I think his work. You could probably guess I'm a bit of a fanboy. Sorry, but because I really think some of the ideas are so simple and yet so powerful that we could be doing something with these, and we're not. Much like a lot of academic work, which we're going to talk about in a minute or two. But I just wanted to remind you of some other work that I'm doing in the background at the moment. I've been working on this show now for, well, best part 3/4 of the year now. And we've started to look at ways we can take it out to the broader public. And just this week, I did a keynote over in Greece, virtually, of course, talking about what I call flourishing and using the idea of storytelling to help organizations and indeed individuals to flourish. And at the end of every month now, the 26th of this month, I'm going to be running a course called Storytelling at Work. And it's really a way to help people to differentiate themselves in a very, very busy and yet competitive marketplace. When I was in school back near Glasgow, there was 1% of all the students went into sixth form. We didn't call it sixth form, we call it sixth year, but effectively it was sixth form, as most of you guys would call down south here. And from that 1%, there was about, maybe, I think there was about 70 of us went into sixth year, and only 5 of us went to university. Today, the numbers, it's astonishing. It's in the 80s and the 90s that go from 5th into 6th year or 6th form and then go into university. So as a former recruiter, it used to be rare to see people with master's degrees and honours degrees. It just isn't the case anymore. And I honestly believe that one of the ways you can differentiate yourself is through your storytelling. So come along. It's 12 quid or something. It's only an hour. I'm going to give you an absolutely solid model for how you can start to create your own stories. Because as you know, as I say every week, stories can change the world. So let's get back to Robin. And I'm going to ask you another question really about that context, to be honest, Robin. And it's back to this idea of storytelling. What role do you have? I'm not sure if you've studied much in that particular context, but I'd appreciate your opinion anyway. storytelling is something that, it goes way back to predates language in some respects with the cave paintings, etc. What do you think about storytelling, and what do you think its key purpose is for human beings?
Well, we've actually done quite a lot of work.
Have you? Oh, yeah, I'm not that well read then.
Catch up, Scott.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But I have to say that's really in the last 5-6 years or so.
Okay.
These things are probably not circulated. But we became interested in storytelling as part and parcel of the business of social bonding. How do we create our friendships? How do
Yes.
we create our communities, bond our communities out of the mechanisms we use to make friends, as it were?
Hmm.
And we discovered one aspect of this, which was essentially storytelling, and that was what we call the 7 pillars of friendship. So these are cultural dimensions, a bit like a supermarket barcode sort of stuck on your forehead about who you are and the things you like. And a lot of those things in there are the bases of, if you like, stories. So there are things like, your worldview, your religious views, positive or negative, your moral views, your political views, your sense of humor, which turns out to be a very important one, your hobbies and interests, the things you're interested in. So, if you like, this is one of those things you then sit around the campfire telling everybody about. And in the course of that, essentially, you're creating a sense of who we are as a community. Why do we belong together? What's our history, as it were, our common history that makes us one community. And so it got us interested in actual storytelling as the sense we usually have it. And we did a very nice experiment using a film, which is actually based on a book, but the book is based on a true story. It's called Stuart Alive Backwards, and it's about the very heart-wrenching story, because it's about a sort of down and out druggie, been in and out of prison, miserable life from childhood, being bullied and all sorts of stuff. It's a terribly heart-wrenching film shown on Channel 4. It was made for Channel 4, the film. And we used this, showed people, had lots of people come in and watch it, and then another bunch had to watch really interesting stuff like some BBC documentaries, which clearly didn't have the same effect.
Okay.
And what we were wondering is two things. First of all, did watching this very emotionally charged story pump out endorphins in their brain? Because the endorphin system is the underpinnings, or provides the underpinnings for our social bonding, both at the friendship level and at the community level. And all the things we do socially and sort of communally, if you like, in that context, trigger the endorphin systems. All sorts of things like, got it. Brilliant. You're way ahead of me. Laughter, singing, dancing, eating together, drinking alcohol together, religious services even, slightly surprisingly, and storytelling. And what we showed with this film, Stuart, and here, I mean, the two most brilliant actors in Britain today, I think. I mean, Tom Hardy is such an amazing character actor, playing the down and out druggie. I don't know who the other guy is, of course. What we showed was that after they'd had this sort of real charge from this watching this film, their endorphin levels were running sky high, which meant their pain thresholds went way up. We were giving them painful exercises to do, and what's more, they felt incredibly bonded to the other people they'd watched the film with, and all these people were strangers, whereas there was absolutely no effect at all of watching kind of rather dull documentaries on medieval gold in Ireland, which is one of the ones we used. But just it's the emotional charge in these stories. It creates this flood of neurochemicals in the brain, which makes us feel bonded and belonging and sort of associated with the people we watch. And of course, then also at the same time running parallel to that, that's the kind of deep neuropsychology of it. But it's sort of like two streams running in parallel. Above that is running this cognitive thing, which is saying, look, we know the same stories. This is why folk tales are so persistent, and because we all know Goldilocks and the Three Bears, we all know Hansel and Gretel and all these kind of stories, because not just because we sort of constantly told them in childhood, but they become a kind of, I don't know, it's like a totem pole at the center of the village green, which we can all go and hang our hats on and say, yeah, this is who we are. We all know these stories. And sort of that sense of creating a sense of belonging is very important to creating a sense of community. Owen Eastwood, who's been a performance coach, not a physical coach, for the Scottish national rugby team, for example, that's one of the things he did with them. So, you need to know about who your family were. By family, we mean the previous players, going back to the original Calcutta Cup in 1890, whatever. Who were the national heroes that you are, the descendants of, and those kind of things, really bond working groups, as in that case, the rugby team is a working group.
Yes.
With a task to do, as it were. And we kind of forget that in both in our everyday lives, as it were, that we all kind of belong together as a community because we share these kind of histories and stories in common. But also, that's how organizations work. That's how businesses work. That's how government departments work. It's the flag they hold up. And I don't mean these silly quotes that they put up at their entrance doors, which just drive me mad. It's the big story of why they're there, what we're here to do. What are we contributing to the wider community by making our product or running an efficient government department, perhaps. And the sense that those who work in that organization then feel they belong to what's effectively a family. That of course, that's the secret of the NHS. It sort of has this vision of itself as doing a public good, and everybody is sort of belongs to the family, and that's why you have this sort of sense of community within the NHS itself, among the NHS workers. But of course, we all at the outside, see the story, understand the story, it's meaningful to us, and we sign up to it and say, keep going, guys, you're doing a great job.
I think that we better watch we don't swiftly move into politics, because I think there's quite a lot in that space. That probably is for a chat in one of the nice Oxford pubs rather than on here. But I guess I'm going to dip my toe in it though, because there is a lot of things in the media just now that are at the edges of large group experience. So you've got large scale debates about things like diversity and inclusion. You've got the political divide about whether or not there's a some sort of male dominant culture in the world. You've got all these other. It's not really dialogue at the moment. I think it's more people just shouting at each other. Have you any opinion on that stuff that's going on? I mean, it's a huge question. We could do 10 episodes on these things, I'm sure. But have you any quick thoughts on that and why that's happening the way it's happening at the moment?
I think it's happening because, in some sense, we're with the increasing globalization of the world, it's making it much more difficult to create sense of community. Communities are realistically small scale things, and obviously they start out at the village, if you like. But there's we have to deal with globalization because we can't get out of it. It's here and it's going to stay. Our problem is how to mitigate the kind of destructive effects that naturally happen. And you see this all the way through primate societies and human societies, from the smallest scale up to the biggest scale, that as an organization gets bigger, so it kind of gets, I wouldn't say it implodes, but stresses emerge within it. And partly that's because people don't know each other anymore. Yes. Right? This was the secret to Gore-Tex's success. They kind of went, no, we're a big organization, but we're going to play it very small. And it created this sense of belonging because it's based on a sort of very clear small factory unit of about 100 to 200 people, but still, there's the big totem pole in the center of the playing field, as it were, that's for the company as a group, that creates this sense of identity and belonging and commitment. So our task, if you like, is how to create that bigger sense. I mean, ultimately, of course, heaven help us, but we got to do that somehow on the grand scale of the planet as a whole, or we're going to be in deep trouble. But I think this is one of the things you can't avoid. The more people you have, the more different views you're going to get. And you invariably end up with fracture. It's a bit like the Hitachi trains that we're suffering with at the moment. You've got stresses from wear and tear, which need to be kind of repaired, not just patched over, but actively repaired. So that's just brings us back to storytelling, really.
Yes. The thing that, and this is I have a real problem with this in my own mind. It's I don't think we can survive without a globalized culture, because I don't believe we can control things like, the exponential disruptions that we're facing with technology, biotech, nanotech, AI, etc. But then you have around us, and obviously I'm a Scotsman. I live in the Cotswolds, but I'm a Scotsman, and I see more and more groups of nationalistic perspectives coming around, which goes against what's going to ultimately, certainly in my view, and I could be wrong, but in my view, the thing that's going to save the whole human race, never mind Scotland. And it is an interesting one. How, I mean, it could be that we're in, I don't know if you've got a view on this, but it could be that we're in a state of flux, that we're going to the next level of the sort of the global structure, if you like. I don't know if you've any view on that. It's probably out with their scope today, but I don't know if you've got a thought on that.
I was going to say, are the Cotswolds declaring UDI now with you as
well? You see, that's one of the other interesting points, and I don't know if you've heard this, but there is a real problem in. I mean, I've got a lot of friends that are in the Scottish government, are Scottish MPs, and they're really worried about Orkney and Shetland.
Yes.
Because both Orkney and Shetland have said that if Scotland goes independent, they're going to look for independence from Scotland. And that has huge ramifications, because I believe Derbyshire have also said that if it could, goodness knows where this is going to end, Robin. Whoosh,
absolutely. But this is kind of symptomatic of the general problem. And I think what to solve this problem, there's no way you can solve the problem by having a single huge state, because the only way that can work is by having an autocracy. It's the Chinese model. If you're going to have some degree of sort of personal identity and personal autonomy, as it were, then what you need clearly is a kind of federalist model. And the two shining examples in a way of those are clearly the US, because the American federal versus state system at least allows the individual states to have some degree of independence while still being part of the whole thing. And it's, I think, the secret partly of their the fact they've still survived 200 years or whatever it is, 207, no, where are we? Whatever, 270 years, 250 years without falling apart completely in the way that, for example, the Russian Empire and Russian USSR did. And partly that flexibility that gives, but also partly that they have a sense of national identity despite the diversity of
Yes.
the population, and that comes from very simple storytelling things, like, sort of pledging allegiance to the flag every morning at school. That sort of binds them together, and it gives them a sense of belonging. It's very important, I suspect. The other, of course, is the Swiss state, which is
Yes.
very, very small scale, city-based, essentially, federation. Each city state, each canton is essentially completely independent.
Yes. Yes.
And for better or for worse. I mean, that's what we've actually managed to do in the British Isles, by and large,
Yes.
an amazingly long period of time. But it's a fractious state, and always has been to some extent. I know, because my family was mainly responsible for the border wars.
What's that?
We were forever going down into England, raiding. And actually, the best one of the lot. So the Dunbars were the Earls of March.
Yes. Right. Okay.
See the remnants of our castle, which that nice man Oliver Cromwell finally got so fed up he blew up for the third time, I think. But the great rivals of the Dunbars were the Douglases.
Yes.
Now, they were, the Douglas Humes are the sort of descendants of that, because the Hume bit, or home as it's spelt, it was actually a Dunbar parish, which was given as the dowry with a Dunbar daughter to marry a Douglas boy. But there's a wonderful occasion at the Battle of Shrewsbury, which is 1780 or something like that, 1480, sometime around there, when the Douglases and the Dunbars clearly heard that there was a rumble going on down in England. So they sort of rang each other up, if you like, and said, "Hey guys, you want to come down for the rumble?" So you had one of them fighting on one side, that was for the English kings, and the other fighting on the opponent's side, which are the Earls of Northumbria. It's just like a Glasgow on a Friday night.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh dear. Well, actually, next week, have you heard of the Fortingall U?
No.
No. Well, it's really quite linked, because the Fortingall U is, by many accounts and by some research, the oldest living thing in Europe. And it's in Perthshire. It's in a churchyard, and it is at least 3,500 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Some say it is 9,000 years old, and the myth has it that Pontius Pilate was born in Fortingall. It's one of the myths, the Pontius Pilate myths, that he was born in Fortingall because his father was in Scotland at one point, and this is the myth. So next week I'm going to investigate it, because in some ways it's a bit like, the monolith in 2001.
Yes,
I kind of get the vibe of that from it, and I'm not the first person to say that. I know someone else has said something similar, but I think it's kind of it's representative of how short our time on this world can be. That this tree is 9,000 years old, and I choose to accept that it's 9,000 years old, which is incredible. Anyway, Robin, we've come to the end. We've run out of time. I'm really sorry we've run out of time, but we have. If people would like to read your work, I mean, I mentioned your new book. You might want to give that what that's about. I recommend it. I'm halfway through it. I got it yesterday. It's a very easy read, which is good, because not all books covering these subjects are. So thank you. Even for an idiot like me, I can read it. But is there anything else you would push people towards, or you'd like people to look at or consider in your work?
Oh, I think that's the best place to start, because it's really a comprehensive summary of everything we've spent the last 25 years doing, putting the big story together, really is what it amounts to. And all the books that precede that are kind of part and parcel of the building blocks towards that. I suppose, if I were to point people at two other books, it would be The Science of Love and Betrayal, which is on sort of mate choices and romantic attachment, and the human evolution, because that's sort of applying some of these ideas to the story of our evolution as a species.
I find that a really fascinating book. I really do. It's a fantastic book. So, well, thank you ever so much, Robin, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this 50 minutes that we've had together. I have.
Very good. Yeah.
And what I'll do next is I'm going to try and take some of these thoughts into my next 2 or 3 interviews, because I think there is links, as I said at the beginning, to the people I'm going to be meeting next. So I hope maybe you could tune in and see where we go with that. But thank you very much on behalf of my audience. It's been terrific seeing you once again. It's been a long time. Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Goodbye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And Robin really, it was lovely the way he brought it all round to storytelling in the end. I really appreciated that. And it was nice getting, someone of his stature coming at it from such a humorous, but nevertheless practical perspective. And as always, before I finish, I'd just like to remind you a couple of things. And it was really touched on by Robin. And it's something that I really do believe is critically important. I see stories as a critical part of our society moving forward. I don't think they've been given the attention they deserve. I don't think storytelling has anything like the level of academic research done into it. It certainly isn't in our MBA programs or in many of our corporate development programs. And the reason for that is because I believe stories can act as an empathy engine. They can really help you understand other people and them to understand you. And in these complex times, I think it's absolutely critical. So I hope you enjoyed the show this week. And remember, the key thing that I'd like you to think about when you go away from today is not only what we've been talking about today with Robin in terms of the science of story, if you like, and in terms of how our social groups form and how they can be meaningful and effective, but also to capture your own stories. Be an archaeologist of your own life, because as I always say, these stories can change the world. Thank you very much for tuning in to Artefact Live. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for the comments. I really appreciate them. Good afternoon. See you next time.